All right, looks like we're live and good to go on YouTube here as usual, Facebook. All right, and there we go. Looks like we're good to go on Facebook. I'm going to adjust my lighting a little bit. Give you guys a little bit of time to come on in, enjoy the party. It is another Monday night. We are here live. My name is Connor Riley with Dog Nation. We'll be talking some Georgia football, events this past week. It's more events happening, I think, around Georgia, which sort of led to me discussing and thinking about rivalries and specifically two of the SEC East ones, Florida and Tennessee, and how they are doing and shaping up going into the future. So that's probably where we're going to start with. We'll give everyone a little bit of time. Bobby Jones, good to see you. Welcome in. Just a little bit of time. We'll talk a little bit about, rivalries. We'll go both the traditional and, the teams like Alabama and Clemson that I think Georgia is measuring itself up against. Ferris Johnson, good to see you. Also, Jake Fromm, the Georgia football account they put out today, his top 5 sort of plays from his time at Georgia. They've been doing this for a number of drafted players, and I found the selections that were made for Fromm to be pretty interesting. His number 1 was not what I think a lot of people would have thought it to be, but, and obviously there's a lot to choose from. I know not every fan is necessarily thrilled with the end of Fromm's career, but it's worth remembering he made quite a number of big throws for the Bulldogs. Time with Georgia. Chris Topple, good to see you from Chattanooga. Hope you're doing well, staying safe up there. We're about 2 minutes in. We'll give maybe another 30 seconds before we really get things started. Shia Boogie, good to see you from Sanford, Florida. So yeah, I just hope everyone out there is staying safe, and doing the best they can in this current situation. Trying to make things as normal as you can. For me, that's watching Survivor. Terry Gibbs, D.H. Hatcher, good to see you guys. It's watching the Jordan documentary, which is someone who did not get to see at least Chicago Bulls Michael Jordan play live, who's been really good and really interesting, even though I do know, a good bit about Jordan's career. It's been really cool and something just to look forward to doing every Sunday and sort of a normal activity. All right, so we've been here about 2 minutes. Audience size is getting pretty good, so why not get started? So as Brandon Adams discussed this morning on Dog Nation Daily, Derek Mitchell, good to see you. Tennessee has had a lot of recruiting success as of late. I believe now they have the most commitments in the 2021 cycle. They've picked up 2 5-star commitments in Dylan Hunter and Terrence Lewis. They picked up a running back this weekend, Stephen Carr, good to see you. They picked up a running back this weekend who for a long time was thought to be one of Georgia's top targets at the position. That is Cody Brown out of Parkview, Georgia, or out of Parkview High School in Little Bern, Georgia. Brown, I think one of the best football players in the state of Georgia. His recruiting rankings, I believe he's the 9th or 10th. James Crump, yes, this is going to be an every Monday evening kind of thing for the time being. But with Cody Brown, that's another big 4-star commitment win for them. They right now have the number 3 class in the country, behind Ohio State, who's the runaway number 1 team in the class, and then North Carolina at number 2, and then you've got Tennessee at number 3, and then I think Clemson or Florida at 4 and 5. I'm not sure where sort of that ranks, but Tennessee is now, I think, making a lot of moves on the recruiting trail that we kind of thought we'd see from Jeremy Pruitt a lot sooner. Timothy Nelson, good to see you. Good to have you in here. Pruitt, even dating back to his time at Georgia, he was known as a very good recruiter, someone who had a very good eye for developing talent. Dominic Sanders, a very good player in his time at Georgia. That was someone who Jeremy Pruitt plucked from obscurity and was a key player for Georgia in his time at the program. And sort of like Kirby Smart, I think a lot of us thought that Tennessee would have a lot of early recruiting success. And Matt Talley, good to see you. And the reality is that didn't materialize for whatever reason. Tennessee is in terms of the number of talent and in-state talent they produce there, it is growing. It's getting better year by year. They have a number of good players. Georgia, in the 2019 cycle, they signed a number of players out of there. Dwayne Dwyer, good to see you. Bill Norton, Timon Mitchell, Zion Logue, 3 defensive linemen who I think at least one of them is going to play a key role for Georgia this year, just in terms of a rotational depth piece. They're going to be important players for this Georgia team. So Tennessee, it's a good state that produces good talent in both the Memphis and Nashville areas. But for whatever reason, yes, they did finish with the number 10 class, but I don't think when Tennessee brought in Pruitt, I don't think that's what anyone was expecting where Tennessee was going to finish. I think a lot more people, myself included, thought they'd be closer in the 5, 6, 7 range. And then if they were able to get things rolling on the field, they could even climb up into that top 3, 4 range. But that just hadn't happened. But I think a lot of success that you saw in the second half of last season when, yes, they beat up on a lot of bad teams. Desmond Thornton, good to see you. Kenneth Wiggins and James Crump. We're going to get to, Tennessee's class. I do think it's being a little overblown right now. Prior to the Cody Brown commitment this weekend, I believe only the 2 5-star commitments that they had landed were ranked among the top 200 class. Two top 200 players in the class. So it's not exactly what you would expect to see from Georgia. I believe before the Brown commitment, Georgia's 6th highest rated commitment would have been Tennessee's 3rd. So from that standpoint, it's not necessarily measuring up the same thing, but I think Tennessee has done pretty clearly a very good job of enticing and recruiting kids to want to come and play for that program. It is a program that I do think is on the come up to an extent. I think the big thing with them is just their schedule is so tough every year because they have to play Georgia every year. They have to play Alabama every year. They have to play Florida every year. And now, as you're seeing, Jarvis Hanna, good to see you. Now, as you're seeing with these teams scheduling big out-of-conference games, Tennessee, tentatively anyway, is set to play Oklahoma this year. And those are 4 games against teams that are probably going to be top 8 teams come, college football preseason poll ranking time. That's not necessarily the recipe you want for a team that still has some flaws and issues. And yes, they've got a very good offensive line. And you trust the defense that Jeremy Pruitt, I think, is putting together there. But, still the quarterback and skill position players, I think that's really where Tennessee needs to get better. Now, obviously, they land Harrison Bailey, who some had as a 5-star prospect and was a good player out of Marietta High School. But I think Tennessee, and maybe this is why landing Brown, I think, is so big, important, crucial for them is, they just have not necessarily landed the skill players that can make a difference. Certainly not like the running backs that Georgia has landed, and the wide receivers, George Pickens, Dominic Blaylock, and even in this past cycle, guys like Jermaine Burton, Marcus Roseman, who I'll have a story on tomorrow, and Arian Smith. I think that's sort of where Tennessee has to get. In 3 years from now, I do expect Jeremy Pruitt to still be the head coach at Tennessee. I do think that if you were to let me pick futures of which teams, stock I would invest more in, Florida or Tennessee's, I would probably take Tennessee's. I think just given what we know about Pruitt, similar to Kirby Smart, he's only going to get better as a head coach. Yes, Pruitt has some growing pains, and perhaps even more so than Kirby Smart has seen in his time at Tennessee. But the thing, and we can sort of use this to pivot into Florida, what's next? Mullen's in his, 11th, 12th year of being a full-time head coach at the SEC level, by the way. So it's not like he's going to make big strides in sort of who he is and what he's going to be. We sort of know what to expect from a Dan Mullen team every year. And I think that's why you've seen Florida so quickly bounce back from the tumultuous end of the Jim McElwain era. But, for as much as Florida talks about wanting to make this leap and sort of go from 11 wins a season, which includes like an Orange Bowl victory, to 12 wins a year, which probably means you're playing an SEC championship game and possibly a college football playoff game, the bottom line is that Florida just needs to recruit better. And similar to the boat Tennessee is in right now, they have a lot more prospects committed, and I think that that's the reason their class is what it is. Based on average recruiting ranking, Georgia, in terms of average commit, Georgia has a better average commit than Florida does. Georgia has just straight up signed better players from Florida. Now Florida does, I think, do a little bit better job of getting more out of their offensive players. That's why you saw both Florida and Georgia finish with 7 draftees in this past draft. But it's pretty clear that Mullen is going to keep bumping his head on sort of the ceiling as long as he is not recruiting at the elite level that the Clemsons are, that the Ohio States, LSU's, Georgia's, Alabama's are. And until you do that, not just for one season, but a consistent season, I find it hard to see you getting over that hump. Yes, they might get a one-off year where they do manage to squeak out and beat Georgia, just given some of the turnover you're going to see at Georgia year to year. But long term, if you give me the next 10 years, I feel Georgia's probably going to, assuming Mullen and Smart are still the coach, Dennis Wilson, Ryan Flanagan on YouTube, good to see you guys. As long as those two guys are still the coaches, I'll take Kirby winning at least 7 of those games, just because I know from a talent standpoint, year in, year out, the Georgia roster is probably going to be better than the Florida roster. Yes, there might be some years like the season where the difference at the quarterback ranking is maybe enough to overcome sort of that. But I still, over the long haul, I think that's what Mullen is. And eventually, if Kirby Smart keeps beating Florida and Mullen doesn't sort of get over that hump, regardless of how much other success he has beating sort of those also-ran teams, Florida's going to be very upset with Dan Mullen, because it's clear, even I believe this is his third, this would be his third season at Florida. He's still, they're still making some of the same mistakes on the recruiting trail. I remember after Kamar Wilcoxon, sorry if I mispronounced your name, after he commits to Tennessee, there was a Florida, assistant player personnel director who tweeted shade at a 17-year-old kid. And, it's just recruiting stuff like that really, Matt Talley makes the point, Mullen can coach, but he can't recruit. Pruitt can recruit, but he can't coach. Either one of them get it together, we might need to be concerned. I agree with Matt's larger point. And honestly, I think just given what we know, and we've seen with Kirby, and we've seen, sort of we know what Mullen is at this point. I'd feel better betting on the Tennessee than I would Florida, because with Mullen the head coach, he's still, we just haven't seen them become that recruiting power that they were certainly under Will Muschamp, but even, what they could be under Urban Meyer. If Will Muschamp had the results and got the results, Mike Gay brings up Mullen as a used car salesman. I don't know, that might be a little mean, but it's also, there's maybe a little truth in that. If Will Muschamp was getting the results that he got, that Mullen is getting, he'd have the number 1, number 2 recruiting class in the country every year. But the reality is that I don't think anyone's expecting Mullen on a consistent basis to be one of the best recruiters, or put together one of the best recruiting classes in the country. And when you're facing teams like Alabama, who's going to do it every year, like Georgia, who's going to do it every year, like how I think LSU is going to get it rolling every year, when you have to face one of those teams guaranteed every season, and probably 2 of them in the SEC title game, if you're going to continue to mope around there at the bottom of the top 10 rankings and just give yourself a talent disadvantage, I think that's tough. And, one thing I think, going back to the Pruitt coaching thing, Jeff Ingham brings up Chaney. Yeah, I think with Jeremy Pruitt, I think, he's going to go through a lot of the same troubles and mistakes that Kirby Smart has gone through. And I think most obviously that just comes on finding a way to get the most out of your offense. Kenneth Wiggins bringing up Frask is from 2.0. That's, I think an interesting comparison. It's not totally off base seeing him a year ago. He did some nice things, but watching that game, I was never overly concerned that, oh boy, Kyle Trask is turning it on. Georgia's in trouble here right now. So, with Mullen in Florida, and not to steal BA's shtick, if you're a Georgia fan, you probably like that, the longer Florida employs Mullen, that prevents them from bringing in an A-plus level coach, because I think Florida, when it's right, is an A-plus level job, just given the access that they have in terms of talent in that state. And Tim Brewster can talk as much as he wants about bringing in or putting a fence around the state of Florida, but he's not going to be able to keep Kirby Smart from landing some of the best players in South Florida, even with James Coley on. I think they've made nice inroads in there. I think that's why the Todd Hartley edition has been sneaky undervalued or underrated, because he does have a lot of the connections to those Florida, both in the Jacksonville area where like Carson Beck came from, and that South Florida area. I think that does very well and bodes very well for him, So, those are, I think, the main 2 SEC rivals. As far as South Carolina, a team that did beat Georgia last season, I don't think Will Muschamp's going to be the head coach there 3 years from now. I think he needs a big year from Mike Bobo this year. They need to make a big jump. And when you're playing Georgia and you're playing Clemson every year, you have to sort of nail those middle round. Though you have to. It's just such an uphill climb. And South Carolina, I think, so desperately wants to be seen on that same level, even as like a Tennessee is, I think, right now. Obviously, ignoring the success of the '90s, but what Tennessee, could theoretically be an 8-9 win team every year. South Carolina can't even get to that level. And I think Tennessee's about to pass them if they haven't already passed them. They beat them on the field this past season. Florida is clearly a team that's going to have a talent advantage over South Carolina every year. And unfortunately, I just don't – as good as a recruiter as Muschamp is, and he's done a very good job getting some elite players there in Columbia, I don't know if there's any coach that can consistently, even if Kirby Smart, and it was as it was rumored, back when he was becoming a head coach for the first time, South Carolina was a school that was very interested in hiring him. I ultimately think, even if he were there, it's just such a tough place to win. And I think, with Spurrier, the success that he had there, I think if you're a school like South Carolina, you really need to hire a great coach, a guy who's going to get, honestly, like a Dan Mullen, who's going to get more than maybe your collective recruiting talent might be, rather so than a all-out recruiter who's going to win you some battles you might not normally win, but a guy who leaves a little bit to be desired from a coaching standpoint, which I think that's what we can certainly say about Muschamp to this point in his head coaching career. Now, we sort of cover those SEC rivals. We'll go Georgia Tech next, and then we'll dive into Clemson and Alabama. I think Georgia Tech, the team that might actually be hurt the most by Tennessee's sort of recruiting bump or recruiting sort of recent resurgence under Pruitt, is Georgia Tech, because Tennessee, I think they've made a concerted effort to go into those metro Atlanta area schools that, quite frankly, Georgia hasn't done a great job of recruiting on a year-in, year-out basis. You look at a program like North Gwinnett, consistently one of the best in the country, or one of the best in the state, and so that's, in my opinion, one of the best in the country. Georgia loses Jordan Hancock to Clemson, who we'll get to in a little bit, and Barrett Carter, who might be the best pure football player in the state next year. It looks like he is now trending towards Clemson if you follow the sort of crystal ball talk on 247 Sports. They're a team that, if Georgia Tech wanted to, just hit the metro Atlanta area hard, clean up there, do really well, and sort of, build your team around that, and even then extending that into the middle Georgia and southern Georgia parts of state. But with Tennessee doing as well as they did, them landing Harrison Bailey out of Marietta, Ramel Keaton out of Marietta, Cody Brown out of Parkview, them landing those kind of prospects, I think hurts Georgia Tech the most, because I am of the belief that if Tech got the right coach in there, and I do think there's some similarities between Jeff Collins and Jeremy Pruitt. I think just about everyone would probably rather have Pruitt than Collins to this point. Pruitt, I think, is regarded as a better sort of recruiter and, defensive mind-wise. I think I'd probably prefer Pruitt there, but that, might just go back to what I saw firsthand with him at Georgia. So I think Tech, they're probably the team that's hurt the most by this Tennessee resurgence. And you have to wonder, this past season was obviously always going to be very difficult for Georgia Tech. And I swear we'll get off this. We spent way too much time talking about a team that won 3 games last year and got just absolutely skull-drugged by Georgia. But they're a team that, I think with Tennessee making this leap, that actually means Georgia doesn't necessarily have to worry about them quite as much as you would have thought, just given, this time last year, Georgia Tech had a higher recruiting ranking than Georgia did. Now, obviously, Tech went on to finish 26th, I think, overall, and Georgia was first. So I think from that aspect, Tech is probably the team that's hurt the most by this. Moving on to Clemson and Alabama, Georgia is set to play Alabama this year. They open against Clemson next year. Those guys aren't necessarily thought of as traditional rivalries, but I think just given, Georgia's past decade with Alabama, and I think this coming decade that you're going to see with Clemson, I think there's enough there to consider them rivals of sorts. I know obviously at one point Georgia and Clemson were rivals given they played a lot more. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how things go from there. Matt Talley, Pruitt could probably do more damage at a place like Florida State. He'll never get Tennessee winning big enough, that's probably a good point. I know Pruitt was the one-time defensive coordinator there at Florida State, and it did not exactly end all that great there. So, but I think, Tennessee's just it's a tough place to win because you are playing Georgia every year. You are playing Alabama every year. If Florida gets things right and has it rolling, you are playing them every year. And it's, I think, a tougher job than that fan base wants it to believe. Kenneth Wiggins brings up, where do you think Brent Venables will go when he leaves Clemson? We'll talk about Clemson right now, because I think they're, if Alabama was the big thorn in Georgia's side for the past decade, I think Clemson is going to be that team for this next coming decade. I don't think there's a job that Brent Venables would leave for. I think he's very content to continue to be the defensive coordinator at Clemson. It's pretty clear Dabo Swinney gives him carte blanche to do what he wants, to pick the players that he wants, to recruit the players that he wants. Clemson's willing to pay quite a bit of money for him. He obviously likes it very much. Certainly in these next coming years, just given, I believe he's got 2 sons on the team, I don't think he's going anywhere for the sort of foreseeable future. Jacob O'Neal, good to see you. So, yeah, I think Dabo and Clemson, they're going to have it rolling for the next couple of years. They've really understood that, up until recently, they hadn't sort of been recruiting at that top 5 level, but they've always understood, all right, you got to go out and get a 5-star elite quarterback. They did it with Taj Boyd, Deshaun Watkins, Trevor Lawrence. I believe I combined Sammy Watkins and Deshaun Watson, both went to Clemson. Trevor Lawrence, DJ Uiagalelei. And then they've also done a very good job of developing both wide receivers, guys who can catch passes from elite quarterbacks, and defensive linemen. And that's a really attractive selling point. And if you actually want to look at sort of how Georgia's recruited and developed, if you want to pick the 3 spots Georgia's been weakest at in sort of this past decade, maybe even under Kirby Smart, I think from a development of talent standpoint, you'd probably point to the wide receiver position, almost certainly, just given the success we saw there this past season. The defensive line, where Georgia hasn't really had a whole lot of draft success when it comes to that position. And then, as good as Jake Fromm was, he obviously took a tumble in the latest draft process. And, were it not for Jamie Newman, and he's still, in my opinion, a question mark. I'm not sure what we're going to get out of him, but quarterback is a big question mark both this coming season for Georgia and sort of in the future, whereas, Clemson's got it set up to where they're going to go straight from Trevor Lawrence, 5-star prospect, to DJ Uiagalelei, 5-star prospect, who had a year to sort of sit and learn. And Dwayne, as far as, the quarterback situation, I do have probably more confidence in Todd Monken than I did in James Coley, just from a mind, his background, and everything that he'll bring to the table. But I think now, like, Kirby Smart has to show that he's willing to take his hands off the wheel and sort of say, all right, Todd, I'm going to trust you to drive this train. You're going to be the guy who sort of fixes things, who makes this offense run. I'm going to, keep my hand out. I'm going to, stick to the backseat, be quiet, not make any interruptions. If I could do a backseat driver impression, my dad, sometimes when I cook or do things, he'll always, double check, micromanage. I think Kirby Smart needs to, maybe not do that. So it'll be interesting to see there. Clemson, they're not going anywhere. Brent Venables, I don't think is going anywhere. I don't think Dabo Swinney, there's a job he'd leave for in this country, even if Alabama came open. He's got it just so great there. He's able to go in any classroom in the country and sell what Clemson is able to sell. They've done an incredible job of development with their program. And even while the rest of the ACC is down, Clemson is pretty clearly an elite team going forward. Even if, the comments Kirby Smart made about potentially a school negatively recruiting, I do think that was probably aimed at Clemson a little bit, just given how awful the ACC was both this past season and I think it's going to be this coming season. But Clemson clearly is a very attractive place to play, a very attractive, sort of place to look at. And that's going to be a major problem for Georgia. And they've had a ton of success in the metro Atlanta area, recruiting-wise. Andrew Booth, 5-star prospect. Miles Murphy last year, 5-star prospect. This year, Jordan Hancock, top 100 player. He's already committed there. I think you're going to see Barrett Carter more likely than not end up playing for Clemson. They've had a ton of success in the metro Atlanta area and probably hurt Georgia more in that area than anyone else. People bring up Brock Vandagriff. He's a guy who hasn't even played his high school senior season yet. And while he does have a lot of the tools and traits that you love and you sort of look for, I do think, let's wait for him to get on campus before anointing him as sort of this next guy to say he's not a worry. And, for every grad transfer quarterback, for every Russell Wilson or Joe Burrow, there's a guy like Everett Golson who went to Florida out of Notre Dame and didn't exactly light the world on fire when he was down there. So, again, I think that Jamie Newman could be a very good player and could, if things go right, he could wind up winning the Heisman Trophy this year. But I think just given what we saw last year from Georgia's offense when there was turnover, and now you throw in the inexperience in the offensive line, the fact that wide receiver is still a question. I do think that it is right and it is certainly fair, I think, to be skeptical. Exactly. Matt Talley brings up Grayson Lambert. Now, I think Newman was better at Wake Forest than Lambert ever was at Virginia. But I think, it is certainly right and fair to be skeptical of what we're going to see from this offense until we actually ultimately see it. Just given a year ago, we all thought there was going to be no drop-off. We were going to get better on sort of the offensive side of the ball, and that pretty clearly wasn't the case, even with guys like Andrew Thomas, Isaiah Wilson, DeAndre Swift, an experienced quarterback, and Jake Fromm. That drop-off still, I think, really hurt the program. So, and wrapping up Alabama, it's hard to say if Nick Saban is going to be the coach there in 3 years. If I had to, if you forced me to put money on it, I probably would. Saban doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's going to show that he's slowing down anytime soon. So, I think when Saban leaves, it's going to be sort of a surprise, sort of like you saw with Bob Stoops when he did at Oklahoma. So, with that, I probably would expect him to still be the head coach at Alabama in 3 years. Now, is he seen in the same light? Has he, does he maybe start to slow down a little bit? That'll be to be seen. They obviously played Georgia this year. And I think that game is going to have a huge, huge sort of impact on how both Kirby Smart is seen and Nick Saban is seen. Because if Kirby wins that game, that'll be him to this point, I think, conquering his biggest demon, though it might actually be Ed Orgeron, just given how LSU has just beaten the tar out of Georgia the last 2 years. But sort of, obviously what that'll mean both for Kirby in terms of beating Nick Saban and Nick Saban. If Kirby beats him, that'll be the first time an assistant has beaten Saban, and that sort of might mark the sea change that I think a lot of college football fans want to see. Dwayne Dwyer brings up Saban retires when he surpasses Bear Bryant. I definitely think Saban is competitive enough to want to do that, to want to say definitively, I am better than Bear Bryant, the best coach to ever coach here. I think he wants to leave, no doubt. And I think, Dwayne, that's a really good point. So, with Georgia, Alabama, 3 years from now, obviously it's not a guarantee that they're going to play every year, but you'd imagine that Alabama is still going to be Alabama. There's probably, on a year-in, year-out basis, they're probably going to be the team that most would expect to represent the SEC West there. Can't believe I got this far, and I just did not mention Auburn. Auburn, to me, is so – maybe it's just the way Auburn is right now, but I honestly don't know if Gus Malzahn is going to be the coach in 3 years there at Auburn, and that's not so much to say that I think Malzahn's a bad coach. I think he's pretty clearly shown he's a good coach, just doing what he's been able to do to beat Alabama, to field a competitive team on a year-in, year-out basis when they have to play the SEC West every year, and then they have to come play Georgia every year. But the Auburn job and that fan base and sort of the way they see themselves on a year-in, year-out basis, it makes it tough to sort of predict and see what things might be like, 3 years from now. If, they made a change at offensive coordinator with Chad Morris now coming in, if things don't go well there this year, and Bo Nix, who was at one point a 5-star quarterback, but I don't necessarily know if anyone thought he played like a 5-star quarterback during, some of their biggest games last year, who knows what that fan base is going to want to do to Malzahn at the end of the season. I think they're sort of like Tennessee. They see themselves as maybe perhaps a little bit bigger and a little bit better than they are. But the reality is, it's just such a tough job, and you have to play that schedule every year. And I think, sort of like Georgia Tech, I mentioned them earlier, I do think that Tennessee eating into that Metro Atlanta area hurts Auburn quite a bit, because while they may not get always sort of the top guys, obviously Derek Brown is an exception, Owen Popo is an exception there. Well, they're not necessarily always able to get those top guys in the state of Georgia. They've cleaned up and done a very good job of getting those, really good, well-regarded, middle-tier 4-star players out of the Metro Atlanta area that Georgia just, for either because they're able to go nationally and get better prospects or for whatever reason. I think Auburn's done a very good job of building their team out of this Metro Atlanta area. And if Tennessee is able to continue to eat into that, Cody Brown was a guy who thought a lot of people thought Auburn would be interested in them. Jeff Sentell Dylan Fairchild is an offensive guard from West Forsyth, up and coming. He's a guy who a lot of people think Auburn has a shot at landing. If Tennessee, and obviously Georgia is very interested in his recruitment and will make a strong effort to land him. But, Tennessee, if Tennessee and Georgia Tech continue to eat into that Metro Atlanta sort of pie, so to speak, that's going to make things tougher for Auburn and Gus Malzahn. And, Malzahn is not – he's a capable recruiter, but I think as you saw with George Pickens, that's a guy who probably – Green Soldier, yeah, usually you hit the nail on the head there, but good to hear from you. Good to see you. With Gus Malzahn, I don't think anyone would consider him a top-tier recruiter. I think if you put Ed Ogeron at Auburn, there's no way that Georgia's able to pull George Pickens from that state and from that team. So, David Wayne Carroll, good to see you. With Malzahn, it's just my big point with him is, and maybe this is why just Auburn doesn't sort of recruit on that same level, but with the instability that it seems to be around that job where, is he going to get fired? Is he going to leave? It seems like there's something like that every year where Auburn loses 2 or 3 games. Even if they go 9-3, it just matters the 3 teams that they lose to. They lose to Alabama, they lose to Georgia, they lose to LSU, 3 teams that all have more talent than them. It makes it hard to sort of predict where they're going to be from season to season. I feel like the Facebook commenters and probably the YouTube commenters as well, I probably should do a better job monitoring YouTube. I feel like Jamie Newman, I stumbled upon something that I wasn't exactly intending to. I'll sort of wrap up here, and we've hit the 30-minute mark, and comments have been really good tonight. So many comments, questions. I'll sort of wrap here on Jamie Newman. Obviously, he's got the tools. I've seen a lot of discussion in recent days about him. People love to bring up that Clemson game. And sort of the struggles there, the detractors. And I guess, you probably put me in not myself, but I'd probably be thrown in the detractor camp just given of Newman, just given I don't assume he's a slam dunk. I don't assume he's going to be, a known commodity for Georgia. But there are people who love to bring up the Clemson game. Wake Forest's best receiver was hurt in that game against Clemson. And when you factor in talent level on that field, Jamie Newman was probably the best player on that Wake Forest offense. And there were probably, the talent edge in that game from Clemson is just so wide. You've seen elite draft prospects go play Power 5 teams, guys like Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, guys who go play those elite teams. And, when the talent advantage is just so wide, there's only so much that can be really done to sort of overcome, some of the playmaking deficiencies that you have there. So, his numbers, and the other big thing to keep in mind with what Newman ran at Wake Forest is not at all what he's going to run at Georgia, even though we kind of have an idea of what Newman is going to run. Obviously, I think it's going to be more spread. Jeff Ingram, he brings up sort of a tangent here, but Rick lost to his rivals. Yeah, Rick inability, his last season in particular, I was covering the team at that time. The Alabama loss was just bad. And while not everyone necessarily considers Alabama year in, year out rival, I think they are certainly considered a rival, except for the part where Georgia unfortunately doesn't beat them. But that is sort of a rivalry game, a team that Georgia measures itself against. And they just got embarrassed at home that day. I was actively pretty angry that we didn't see a good game that day, and just that Georgia just completely laid an egg. They lose to Tennessee, a game where, yes, Nick Chubb unfortunately goes down, and I think he was a big part of their offense. But they had a 3-score lead in that game. And Georgia, I still found a way to lose that game to a Tennessee team that probably wasn't better than them. And then, the Florida game, that was the final nail in Rick's coffin. They decided to go out and start Fatan Bauta for reasons that are still really unknown. And it was the worst football game I think I've ever seen. It's certainly the worst offensive performance I've seen. And I saw a 9-6 Missouri game literally 2 weeks beforehand. So, I believe, let me see. I want to give him credit. Yeah, to Jeff's original point, the big reason he's gone, it's not because he wasn't recruiting success. The 2013 class, I think, played a big reason in why sort of Georgia made that downturn that they did. He just couldn't beat the teams he needed to beat the most: Florida, Alabama, and that last year, Tennessee. So, and sort of pivoting back to Jamie Newman here, he does have some really nice traits. There's a reason I think NFL draft guys are aware of him. There's a reason I think a lot of people want to see what he's able to do sort of on a team that might be better equipped to sort of fit his talent skills. George Pickens, is a really good receiver, and I think a lot of people are interested to see how those two sort of mesh and work together. Zamir White and sort of that running back room, there's a lot to like there. Georgia offensive line, well, yes, they do lose a lot from this past year. They're still probably pretty well off, and most teams in the country would probably take Georgia's starting five, whoever that might be. I think off the top of my head, I'll go Jamari Sawyer at left tackle, Justin Safer at left guard, Trey Hill at center, Ben Cleveland at right guard, and Warren McClendon at right tackle. But you take those guys, most teams in the country would probably take Georgia's over there. So there's still a lot to work with. I want to see it from Jamie Newman first. And if he comes out and he lights up Virginia and then he plays really well on the road at Alabama and Tuscaloosa, I'll be a believer, and I'll be the first one to say, yeah, this guy's legit. All the people that were, believing in him and we're saying this guy's going to be really well and do really well in the Georgia system, I'll happily eat crow. I'm a guy who, with that position and given what it has been under Kirby Smart, you can say what you want about the Justin Fields thing. It's clear Georgia did not get the most out of him. I think it's clear now you can say Georgia did not get the most out of Jake Fromm. Under Kirby Smart, this Georgia team has not necessarily gotten the most out of this quarterback position. And I think with a guy like Jamie Newman, who has such a high ceiling given his NFL traits, I think that I would like to, see Georgia and Todd Monken specifically get sort of the most out of it. Jamie Vizzini, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name there, but this pandemic has tempered my expectations. And sort of to that point, not just on Newman, but the team as a whole, Georgia losing spring practice was huge. They don't get a chance to install a new offense. And Kirby Smart has said time and time again, reps are the most important thing, especially when it comes to that quarterback position. So I think we do need something to believe in. I still think Georgia's going to be a very good team. I think they're going to win the East. I believe I've been on record, and I will maintain on record. I think Georgia's going to go 11-1 in the regular season. I think they're going to see Alabama again in the SEC championship game, and I think they're going to beat them in the SEC championship game. So there's your little positivity. I see Green Soldiers getting into it in the comment section. I gotta keep him loose, gotta keep him warm for Dog Nation Daily, where he's really out there battling it out on the front lines. Green Soldier, good to see you as always. So that'll wrap it up here. We went about 37, 38 minutes tonight, so it was a good day. Hope all you guys are enjoying, the current situation the best you can, making the most of it. I know here in Georgia, they are easing up on sort of the stay-at-home restrictions. I'm not going to get political here, obviously, but just try to find something positive either to do or to say to someone every day and sort of make the most out of it. And hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll all get through this. We'll all have football to look forward to and actually talk about. So stay safe, have fun, enjoy the rest of your Mondays. We'll be back here next Monday at 7, probably talking about Jamie Newman again, just given sort of what happened and transpired there tonight. You got Dog Nation Daily tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. You've got Mike Griffiths on the beat at 12:30. You've got Jeff Santel's Before the Hedges at 6 o'clock on Wednesdays. Got plenty of other great content coming for you guys this week. As I mentioned earlier, I've got something on Marcus Rosemy coming tomorrow morning that I'm pretty excited to show and share off. I think it's going to be a really good, interesting look. And sort of later on in the week, there's been some talk about a 8-9 or a sort of 10-game season, and for college football, of them shortening it to 10 games, you get one sort of regional non-conference game, which for Georgia will obviously be Georgia Tech. But there's talk of being 9 conference games, given a lot of conferences play sort of 9 conference games. The SEC only plays 8. So what does the SEC decide to do there and do, obviously does Georgia add an SEC West opponent? Who would that be, given they already set to play Alabama and Auburn? They're two sort of closest in proximity SEC West teams. I think it's a really interesting thing for the SEC to sort of look at and sort of figure out if that is the scenario that they have to go with. So that'll be something to be on the lookout for. Have a great Monday night. Thanks. This was a good time. You guys keep checking out Dog Nation.